Historian's Note. This story takes place in the 8th year of Jean-Luc Picard's command of the Enterprise D, after the events chronicled in All Good Things, and prior to those described in Generations. Simon & Schuster Audio presents Star Trek: The Next Generation Crossover by Michael Jan Friedman. Read by Jonathan Frakes.
Spock looked out on the 40 or so Romulans standing amid a sea of industrial cargo containers in a vast storage chamber. Most of their faces were unfamiliar to him. Still, they were fellow unificationists. Until now, Spock and his followers had restricted their activities to Romulus. Now on this outer world known as Constanthus, they would spread the word of Surak further than it had ever been spread before. As one, every Romulan in the room lifted his or her hand in the Vulcan greeting. Spock returned the gesture. "Live long and prosper, followers of Surak." The one called Balon, to whom this building belonged, responded in the prescribed manner. "Peace and long life to you, teacher. We are in a safe place and may speak freely here." Spock nodded and began the speech he had prepared. "Followers of Surak, you honor me with your presence. You show great courage in attempting to bridge the gap between our two peoples who are one in blood. In the months to come, I shall endeavor to share with you what I have learned from the teachings of Surak. Since ancient times, when we were one people, the relationship between student and teacher has been a sacred one." The Vulcan paused for a moment, but before he could continue, one of Balon's people rushed into the room. The man made no effort to curb his emotions. "Someone here is using a transmitter, Balon." To his credit, Balon retained his control as he turned to the Vulcan. "Teacher, we have been betrayed." A moment later, the first Romulan soldiers burst into the room, disruptors in hand. For a brief moment, the unificationists struggled with them, but the struggle was short. It ended with several of Spock's comrades falling in agony to the soldiers' crackling blue disruptor beams. The Vulcan himself did not resist. What's more, he encouraged the others not to resist either. Resistance was not logical in this case. Clearly, there would be no escape. Finally, order was established. A stillness settled over the room as the Empire's newest prisoners conceded their fate. A few moments earlier, Spock had seen hope in the faces of the Constantharines. After all, they were greeting a teacher who would take them down Surak's path. Now those same faces were full of despair. This was just the sort of meeting that put Leonard McCoy to sleep. In fact, he'd nearly dozed off twice already. At the moment, he was listening to the Starfleet cultural anthropologist who sat across the table from him in the Zapata's conference room. The man's name was Gibbs. "In many ways, the Stug are a people of contradictions. They showed openness when they invited Starfleet to visit their world 75 years ago, leading to Admiral McCoy's first contact encounter with them. On the other hand, they have asked all Federation personnel to leave their world on 4 previous occasions, never extending an explanation." Drake, the tall, red-haired captain of the Zapata, nodded sagely. "Of course, none of the other periods of isolation lasted more than a standard month until now." Carmen, a thin, dark-haired woman who'd made a career out of conflict mediation, leaned forward.
"That's true, Captain. There is no precedent for an isolationist period of this duration in our experience with the Stug."
McCoy sighed. In his day, he had watched starship captains size up a problem in an instant. He would not let this charade go on another minute. "Why don't we just go to the Stug capital, beam down, and ask them why they've cut off relations with us?" An embarrassed silence descended over the room. When Drake broke it, he spoke to McCoy patronizingly. "An interesting idea, Admiral. Has your experience with the Stug provided any insight into why that might be successful?" The Admiral made no effort to match the captain's soft, polite tone.
My experience as a Starfleet officer for over 100 years has been that one should never overlook the obvious. Captain, there's a Priority 1 message for Admiral McCoy from Starfleet Command.
McCoy felt a chill. Someone's died, he thought. Drake touched him on the shoulder.
You can take it in my ready room, Admiral.
McCoy nodded. Exiting the conference room, he couldn't shake his sense of dread. At 145, his main regret was that he'd lived to see so many friends kick the bucket. Entering the captain's ready room, he allowed himself to be guided around Drake's desk. The captain offered him a seat, but he waved it away, preferring to stand. He watched Drake exit, then turned his attention to the desktop monitor.
Computer, relay message from McCoy, Leonard H., Admiral, to this station.
Without delay, the small screen in front of him produced an image of Admiral Keaton. Keaton was highly placed in Starfleet security. Whatever this was about, it was important.
Admiral McCoy, I'll get right to the point. I have bad news. It appears your former colleague and friend, Ambassador Spock,
McCoy finished the sentence for her,
has been killed. How did it happen?
The Admiral shot him a quizzical look before she spoke again.
No, Admiral McCoy, you misunderstand. To the best of our knowledge, Ambassador Spock is still alive. That, in fact, is the problem.
McCoy felt a tide of relief wash over him.
What do you mean, that's the problem? Ambassador Spock has been on the planet Romulus for a while now. He's working with a small group of Romulan insurgents called Unificationists, who are seeking a reconciliation with the planet Vulcan. However, he and several other Unificationists were taken prisoner recently on one of the Romulan outworlds, a place called Constanthus. Taken prisoner, eh? Do the Romulans know who they've got? Apparently not. However, if they find out we're facing a security breach that could be a most serious threat to the Federation.
The implications of Spock's capture were quite clear to McCoy. As an admiral, he'd learned more about Federation security than he'd ever wanted to know.
What's the plan to get him out? We're dispatching a Galaxy-class vessel to the Romulan neutral zone, Admiral. We'd like you to go along as an expert on Ambassador Spock. No one alive knows him better than you do.
McCoy was surprised, but the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. He nodded.
So what's the name of this Galaxy-class ship?
Keaton paused for a moment, as if she were delivering important news.
It's the Enterprise.
Montgomery Scott was sleeping when the computer woke him. Rising, he saw that it had picked up a Priority 1 communication heavily encrypted, and it had contained one of the subjects he'd programmed the computer to flag. The engineer waited to see if the Goddard would be able to decode it, with the help of the circuits he'd added for just that purpose. After all, Starfleet didn't fool around when it came to security. After a long moment, the message came through. At first, it brought a smile to Scotty's face to see McCoy again on his monitor. But the feeling faded quickly when he heard the news from Admiral Keaton. Spock was in danger, grave danger. Even if the Romulans never found out the Vulcan's identity, Romulan justice was swift and sure, and in the Empire, there was only one punishment for treason. What's more, the Federation was in a difficult position. It couldn't launch a full-scale attack to retrieve one man. A smaller-scale rescue would have a better chance, but not much. And when the Romulans discovered it, they'd be merciless. In the old days, Scotty had believed that anything was possible. But he was alone now, in a solitary shuttle with none of the backup he'd enjoyed in his miracle worker days. This time, there was no hope, none at all, unless, checking the navigational computer, he saw that he could cover the distance in a reasonable time, possibly even quickly enough to save Spock. But there were too many variables. Too many things Scotty didn't know and couldn't plan for. He quit that line of thinking, deeming it unproductive. Then he reset his shuttle's course. Starbase 178 and what he needed were 12 hours away, and he had a lot of work to do before he arrived. Captain Jean-Luc Picard shifted uncomfortably in his ready-room seat. The monitor in front of him displayed the long, weather-worn face of Starfleet Commodore Edric.
There's no easy way to say this, Captain. It's Ambassador Spock. He's been captured with a group of unificationists on one of the Romulan Empire's outer worlds. A place called Constanthus. Literally, crossover. For its position halfway between Romulus and the neutral zone.
Picard's mouth went dry. Spock.
Do they know who he is?
Edric shook his head.
Not yet, so time is of the essence. That's why we're dispatching a consultant to help you. Someone who knows Spock like the back of his hand. You may have heard of him. His name is McCoy. Admiral Leonard McCoy.
Picard nodded.
I know who he is, and I know his relationship to Spock.
Better than anyone could possibly guess, Picard mused. Edric seemed happy that he didn't have to go into a long briefing on McCoy.
Then our business is finished, Captain. I'm forwarding the rendezvous coordinates and formal orders to your ship. Good luck, Jean-Luc.
With that, Edric disappeared from the monitor screen. The captain sighed. Once before, he had traveled into the Romulan Empire to find Spock. But then, the Vulcan had been free. Now he was a prisoner of the Romulan Empire. A different matter entirely. Scotty had barely landed the Goddard at Starbase 178 when he found himself rushing to catch the Starship tour. An Ensign Hammond greeted him at the lower shuttle deck. On the ride out, seated among 19 other tourists, Scotty took a moment to appreciate the spectacle of the Yorktown, a Constitution-class ship, just like his beloved Enterprise. Unfortunately, he didn't get a very long look at her. Before he knew it, they were gliding into the old girls' shuttle bay where Hammond launched into a well-rehearsed speech. Welcome to the Constitution-class starship USS Yorktown, registry NCC 1717. This vessel was built 120 years ago at the San Francisco shipyard above Earth. In its day, the Yorktown and its 11 sister ships were the most advanced Federation vessels in space. The ensign pointed out the shuttle door. If you'll follow me into the shuttle bay, we'll explore its museum, which includes artifacts collected from the voyages of the Constitution-class starships. If you're curious about anything, feel free to ask the ship's computer. Now, let's begin our starship adventure. Scotty was among the last to exit the shuttle. Making his way to a display case, he found the device he was looking for. About a meter in height, it consisted of 2 circular sections. He tapped the intercom pad next to the display. Computer. Is this the original Romulan cloaking device retrieved by the Enterprise on stardate 5027.3?
Yes, it is. Thank you for your interest, and enjoy your starship adventure on the USS Yorktown.
Scotty nodded. So far, so good.
Computer, is the unit operational? Has it been modified in any way?
The Romulan cloaking device is fully functional and has been restored to its original specifications. Thank you for your inquiry, and enjoy your starship adventure on the USS Yorktown.
Well, that's it then, Scotty thought. Suddenly, he realized he wasn't alone in front of the exhibit. Turning, he saw the face of a young boy. The lad pointed to the cloaking device. A ship like this stole that cloak from the Romulans, you know. The starship got chased by 3 Romulan battlecruisers when it tried to get away. Man, that must have been something. Scotty waited until the boy's attention was drawn elsewhere, then nodded.
Aye, lad, it was.
Their first stops were at the cargo and recreational areas in the lower decks. En route, Scotty could feel a vibration through the deck floors. The warp engines were online, he noted. When they reached the engineering deck, Scotty felt his throat constrict with nostalgia, but he kept his mind on his task. While the others were marveling at the engine core, Scotty discreetly headed for auxiliary control and seated himself behind the console. Then he quietly obtained access to the ship's engineering functions. His first task was to change the codes to restrict access. Then he began a minor overload in the warp engines. Abruptly, he was interrupted by Ensign Hammond.
"We're moving on, Captain Scott."
The engineer nodded. He endured the remainder of the tour, but it was a blur to him. He was too preoccupied with his plan. It was almost an hour later that the tour got on a turbolift headed for the bridge. He couldn't afford to have his time cut short this time, so when the turbolift door opened, Scotty emerged before anyone else, intent on his objective. Taking a seat at the engineering console, he quickly accessed the engines, then increased the rate of the overload. It would only be a few moments now. Turning his attention to the rest of the group, Scotty saw Ensign Hammond explaining modular bridge design to the other tourists. Her lecture was interrupted when warning lights went off at most of the bridge stations.
"Hammond here."
The ensign was instructed to go to the communications station. Once there, she picked up an earpiece and listened to a private message. When she returned to the group, she was all business.
"I'm afraid we'll have to be getting back to the starbase now. There's a minor malfunction in the life support system. It's nothing to worry about, but I've been asked to evacuate the ship so maintenance crews can make repairs."
She gestured toward the turbolift.
"If you will please enter 5 at a time, the lift will take you directly to the shuttle bay."
As the first group entered, Scotty took the ensign aside.
Is there anything I can do, lass?
Hammond sighed.
"There's a fluctuation in the warp engine, and the base is having trouble accessing the Yorktown's systems, but it's probably nothing."
Scott shrugged.
"Perhaps I could take a look at the engines for you."
Hammond smiled.
"No, thank you, sir. Only base personnel are allowed to perform repairs."
Sighing, Scotty followed the ensign into a turbolift. All during the ride, he wondered how he would separate himself from her. Nothing certain came to mind. As they walked out onto the shuttle deck, the ship's computer began announcing yellow alert. It was an automatic response to the overload. Suddenly, the boy Scotty had met earlier threw them all a curve. Without warning, he broke and headed for the shuttle bay doors.
"It's the Romulans! I want to see!"
Hammond looked up at Scott, stricken. He held up his hand.
"I'll get it for you, lass. Just get the shuttle ready."
It wasn't easy to catch the lad, but Scotty knew the corridors better than he did. After a couple of minutes, he caught sight of the youngster in front of a turbolift and commanded him to halt. Reluctantly, the boy obeyed. But Scotty wasn't angry, not in the least. By then, he realized what an opportunity he'd been handed. Grabbing the youngster's arm, Scotty directed him into a turbolift. The boy looked at him as if he were insane.
"Where are we going?"
Scotty touched the lift's command pad.
"The transporter room, lad."
The boy swallowed back his trepidation. Then the lift came to a halt, the doors opened, and Scotty escorted him to the ship's transporter facility. As they approached, the doors parted for them.
"Have you ever taken a transporter?"
The boy shook his head, afraid and excited at the same time. The engineer grunted.
"Then you're going to have an adventure. Step up there, please."
Though clearly still apprehensive, the boy ascended to the platform. Scotty took his place behind the transporter controls, then tapped the intercom control.
"Captain Scott to Ensign Hammond. I have the boy in the transporter room, but there's nae time to bring him to you. I'm prepared to transport both of us to the shuttle while you're in flight."
"Sir, I can't allow that. We'll wait for you here." Scott was trying to think of a response when the Yorktown saved him. The ship went to red alert, flashing lights, klaxons, and all. Hammond's intercom voice was taut.
"On second thought, sir, I don't think there's time."
Scotty smiled.
"I'll get started as soon as you clear the ship, Ensign. Scott out."
He looked at the boy.
"I cannot come with you, lad. No matter what I told Ensign Hammond, I need this ship for an important mission. You see, I'm going to face the Romulans."
The boy's eyes lit up like beacons. Scanning his board, Scotty could see that the shuttle was clear of the ship. He winked at his unknowing accomplice.
"And son, I could never done it without you."
Scotty energized the transporter. A moment later, the lad vanished in a blur of color and light. Confirming that the youngster had reached his destination, Scotty headed out the door at a jog, ignoring the intercom's insistent chirping. A few seconds later, he was back at auxiliary control. Sitting down at the main panel, he heard Ensign Hammond call him over the intercom. Wincing, he ignored her and got to work. It was a simple matter to halt the engine overload and to lock out the shuttle bay, so the doors wouldn't open when the maintenance crew arrived. Then he released the ship from her moorings, grabbed a toolkit from the storage locker, and sprinted for the shuttle deck. Once there, he wasted no time freeing the cloaking device from its display case and bringing it to engineering. It took 8 minutes to install, which was less than he'd planned. Finally, He took a turbolift to the bridge. When he reached it, he bolted for Sulu Station. The view screen already held the base commander's angry, bearded visage.
We've scanned the ship, Captain Scott. We've seen what you did to the access codes. Whatever you're planning, it won't work.
Blocking out the man's warnings, Scotty laid in the course he'd calculated on board his shuttle and hit the forward thrusters. He estimated it would take a minute to clear the dock. The base commander was angry now.
I can't allow this vessel to be stolen, Captain Scott. Don't make me fire on the Yorktown.
Scotty looked up from his controls.
I regret this, Commander, but you have my word I'll return your ship if it's within my power to do so.
All that remained was to push the button that would activate the cloaking device. A moment later, a warning light told him the cloak was operational. He took the ship to full impulse. Scotty knew it would be a simple matter for the Starbase crew to recalibrate sensors and penetrate the obsolete cloaking system. But in those few minutes, the Yorktown would make it well out of their range. He'd done it. Governor Tharis of Constanthus leaned back in his chair and eyed his chief of security.
Yes, Fabris. The prisoners have been secured, Governor.
Tharis allowed himself a smile. The arrival of the home-world rebels had been an unforeseen development. Nonetheless, it was one he had been more than ready to act upon. What's more, the governor would be able to shape their fates entirely on his own, from arrest to trial to their ultimate disposal. It would be a matter of great prestige, and prestige translated into power. Tharis lifted his powerful body out of his chair. With a gesture, he indicated the door.
Take me to them, Fabris.
The security chief nodded. As Tharis followed, his personal guards fell into line behind him. Outside, in an enclosed courtyard, he saw the rebels gathered in front of the prisoner quarters at the opposite end. There were nearly 40 of them in all. Tharis wondered if they knew how short their future would be. After all, he prided himself on meting out swift and sure justice. At his approach, the traitors' heads turned. For the first time, he scrutinized them. He found himself surprised by their appearance. They looked like any other cross-section of the populace. None of them seemed particularly daunted by him. One in particular, a middle-aged specimen, was watching him closely, almost studying him. As Tharis approached, the rebel arrogantly stood his ground. The governor frowned, speaking to all of the prisoners.
You have been charged with treason. In 3 days, you will be tried and convicted of your crimes. You know the punishment. But if any of you makes a full confession now, I will see that his or her death comes quickly.
Still no reaction. The middle-aged one simply stared at him. Tharis addressed him in particular.
What is your name, traitor?
Spock cocked an eyebrow.
I am called Selek.
Tharis glared at him.
Do you wish to confess your crimes, Selek? Surely, as a student of the Vulcans, you can see the sense in avoiding unnecessary discomfort.
But the prisoner didn't take the bait.
I see no logic in confessing to crimes I have not committed. Like everyone here, I only seek knowledge. You dare claim your treason is a quest for knowledge? You would consort with our enemies and destroy the purity of the Romulan way of life?
The prisoners spoke as if they were having a polite conversation at the praetor's dinner table. The Empire cannot rule by crushing all opposing philosophies and ideas. All living things must grow and change. If the Empire insists... The governor backhanded the prisoner across the face.
You seek to secure yourself an easy death by taxing my patience, Selek. But you will have to stand trial, like the others.
Turning away from the prisoner, he led his men in the opposite direction. Soon all the rebels would know a fate that every sane Romulan rightly feared. Nonetheless, Tharis was galled to think that the rebels had won the first round. Picard stood in the shuttle bay flanked by Commander Riker and Counselor Troy, and watched the shuttle from the Zapata move through the force field that held in their atmosphere. It glided across the deck and gently landed. As Picard approached the craft, the door opened. Slowly, Admiral McCoy emerged from it. The captain had met McCoy once before, just before the launch of the Enterprise. Then, as now, Picard was struck by how frail the man looked. Of course, simply reaching such an advanced age was a remarkable achievement. The captain inclined his head out of respect.
Admiral, welcome to the Enterprise.
I wish I could say I was happy to be here, Captain, but under the circumstances, I'll just say I'm glad the situation is in your hands and not someone else's.
I appreciate your confidence, Admiral. May I present my first officer, Commander William Riker, and my ship's counselor, Deanna Troy.
McCoy nodded, then turned to Picard. What's next, Captain? Picard indicated the exit.
We'll arrange for your things to be taken to your quarters, Admiral. You then have the option of retiring there for a rest or joining us in the ship's lounge.
McCoy looked at him askance. Captain, I didn't come here just to show the colors. I'd like to know what state your plans are in for getting Spock out of that Romulan rat's den. Suddenly, Picard saw what the problem was.
Admiral, at the moment, there is no plan, other than to follow Starfleet orders and take up a position near the neutral zone, where we will pursue a diplomatic liaison.
For God's sakes, man, we don't have time for diplomacy. Spock is at the mercy of those people. The captain stiffened.
Currently, Admiral, there is no danger to Federation interests or security.
And until Spock becomes a security disaster, we don't have to do anything to help him? The Admiral was ranting out loud now, having given up pretense to officers' decorum. Picard managed with effort to keep his own voice steady.
I am not proposing to abandon the ambassador to his fate, but I am saying we must be cautious.
Aren't you the Jean-Luc Picard who beat back the Romulans during that Klingon Civil War? The fella who busted up the conspiracy when those parasites invaded Starfleet Command? So how can you be hemming and hawing now over a simple rescue operation?
Admiral, there is nothing simple about the rescue of a Federation official from a heavily guarded position in hostile territory,
where our very appearance would constitute an act of war.
Rescue may not be an option, which is something the ambassador himself will understand.
We have a very delicate situation in which we must weigh and balance a great many considerations. Damn it, Picard, I was weighing and balancing before your father was in diapers, and I've learned that the longer you wait to tackle something, the harder it is to come away in one piece. For the first time, Picard let some of the anger he was feeling seep into his voice.
Admiral, I'll take into account whatever advice you care to give me, but I refuse to be rushed into any action that will endanger the Federation, this ship, or its crew.
The Admiral glowered back at him. Then, muttering to himself, McCoy turned and made his way toward the exit. Unfortunately, Picard had the feeling this conversation wasn't quite over. At least not as far as Admiral McCoy was concerned. Proconsul Eragian of Romulus stared at his data screen in silence. Most of the reports before him revealed increasing tension in the outer worlds of the Empire. 2 instances of outright insurrection, quickly suppressed, but disturbing nonetheless. And then there was Governor Tharos. The proconsul's eyes narrowed, giving his reflection in the monitor a predatory look. He had never given much thought to the governor of Constanthus. And yet, in apprehending a pack of the Unificationists, Tharos had accomplished something even the Tal Shiar had failed at. What's more, he would almost certainly seek to make something out of this, to gain a name for himself. The governor's kind hungered after power the way Ferengi hungered after Latinum. And now he had the means to satisfy his hunger. Tharos would keep the prisoners and try them himself, no doubt. He would attempt to demonstrate to the Romulan people that he was as effective as the homeworld leadership. Of course, from the Empire's point of view, his actions were deplorable. Tharos was demonstrating that he was more interested in his own gain than in the welfare of the Empire. However, there was no easy solution to the problem. If Aragian challenged the governor's authority, the leaders of the Outer Worlds would see that as a threat to their power. And the Outer Worlds were becoming well represented in the Senate. Aragian frowned. For now, it would be best simply to monitor the situation. Sometimes these things had a way of taking care of themselves. Spock brought himself out of the meditation early. He had less than 4 days before the trial. There was much to do in that time. Making his way out into the courtyard, the Vulcan noted how his comrades' heads all turned in his direction. As if by instinct, they clustered about him. He chose his words with care. I have contemplated our situation, and I believe we can accomplish much in the time we have left. If we apply ourselves, we will remain undefeated in our quest for enlightenment. A Romulan in his early 20s raised a voice edged with anger. Quest for enlightenment, teacher, is that all your logic can offer us now? Spock was unperturbed. What is your name, student of Surak? My name is Scrasus, and you have not answered my question. Spock looked past the anger, past the fear, and saw the resentment in the man's soul. Scrasus had been expecting something more from him. Unfortunately, Scrasus, there is no logic or philosophy that will allow us to avoid our fate. Rather, we must accept it and go on. To do anything else is to deny the gift of life. The Vulcan's words had a calming effect on his followers. Clearly, they saw the logic in accepting their future. All of them except Scrasus. Teacher, what good will knowledge do us if we will die in a matter of days? Spock focused his full attention on the Romulan. The quest for knowledge is its own reward, Scrasus. Until we die, we remain the masters of our lives. I choose to spend that time learning, and I welcome all others who make the same choice. Silence fell over the assembled students. None of them moved, the Vulcan noted. Scrasus still looked unsatisfied. However, he remained there with the others, willing to hear more of Surak's wisdom. That was good, Spock thought. Seeing that Scrasus would be an interesting student, the teacher began the afternoon's lesson. Sitting in engineering, Scotty passed the time by inspecting his cloaking device. It resided where he had installed it, on the dilithium reaction chamber. Of course, it looked different now. In addition to its basic components, it sported all the new add-on modules he'd constructed out of parts scavenged from the Yorktown. With a little ingenuity, he'd been able to drastically increase the power of the device and eliminate most of the energy discharges that had rendered it susceptible to Starfleet sensors. Now, there was just one more piece of business before he could head for the neutral zone. And according to his control panel, which was lighting up on the other end of the room, that business had just arrived. Swiveling in his chair, Scotty left engineering and headed for the shuttle deck at a trot. As he approached the shuttle bay control room, the doors opened for him. Through them, he could see the Goddard hanging in space. The shuttle's autopilot had brought it to the rendezvous point. Taking the controls, he locked the Yorktown's tractor beams onto the shuttle. Then he guided it inside and waited for the chamber to repressurize. The warning light finally shut off, and he entered the shuttle bay. Striding across the deck, the engineer opened the Goddard's door and climbed inside. At its control console, he activated the command interface he'd prepared en route to Starbase 178. The operation, which established a link between the shuttle's computer and that of the Yorktown, took less than a second to complete. Pronouncing the interface complete, Scotty got up and headed for the bridge. Once there, he slaved the starship's primary functions to the shuttle's computer, which handled them all with processing power to spare. Then he established access to the shuttle's computer via the Yorktown's bridge stations, giving himself full control over a vessel that had once required an entire crew. Of course, his labors were far from finished. He still had to release the safety interlocks on the phaser banks and power them up. And when that was done, he'd have to bleed off antimatter from the engines for the photon torpedoes. Yes, there was a lot to do, but Scotty had the situation well in hand. As Spock approached his followers, he raised his hand in the traditional Vulcan greeting. Live long and prosper, students of Surak. As a group, they returned the salute.
Peace and long life, teacher.
Before Spock could begin the day's lessons, Balon stepped forward. Teacher, excuse my interruption, but we have not yet dealt with the presence of the spy among us, the one who transmitted our location to the soldiers. Spock reminded himself that these people were Romulans, and that their passions were very close to the surface. They were only beginning to embrace the principles of Surak. Balon, how do you propose to determine the identity of this infiltrator? Would you have me use the Vulcan mind meld? Yes, teacher, if necessary. And what would that accomplish, Balon? At that point, young Scrasus stepped forward. Surely logic allows us to seek retribution for what was done to us. The Vulcan shook his head. No. Logic tells us that each of us is responsible for our situation, in equal measure. Each of us made a decision to violate the laws of the Empire in our quest for knowledge, though we knew the consequences if we were caught. We face Romulan justice, Scrasus. I think you will agree it is a system we abhor. Would you have us mete out the same sort of justice to the agent among us? A person who no doubt serves his or her society with dedication and conviction. The Vulcan surveyed the faces of his students as they grappled with what he had said. They were Romulans, so there was a measure of resistance. But he was confident that logic would prevail. He continued, before beginning any course of action, we must ask ourselves if it serves a useful purpose. In this case, revenge would serve no purpose at all. Scrasus remained unconvinced. But the spy is still among us. Our every move is being reported to the governor. Spock tilted his head. And what would he have to report? That we are discussing the wisdom of Surak? If so, he would be helping us to spread Surak's word, which is, after all, our purpose. Scrasus shook his head. The Romulan soul and our joint heritage cries out for retribution. To ignore that would be to deny who we are. Spock conceded the point. It is indeed illogical to deny one's nature. However, the intellect is also part of that nature. As Surak's followers, we do not seek to subvert the impulse for retribution. We seek only to ensure that emotions are not the guiding principles in our lives. In the present case, we would only lose by seeking revenge on our betrayer. Even Scrasus fell silent, and by that sign, Spock knew he had accomplished something. Scotty sighed as the voice of the Yorktown's computer flooded the bridge.
The Yorktown is now crossing the Romulan neutral zone. Thank you for your inquiry and enjoy your starship adventure on the USS Yorktown.
Scotty knew the news should have filled him with excitement and anticipation, but he only felt the aches and pains of his labors on the weapons system. In the end, it had been worth it. He had the phasers back online and 7 fully charged torpedoes at the ready. Of course, the hardest part was yet to come, and it had nothing to do with high-tech tinkering. He still had to locate Spock on a planet full of Vulcanoids, beam his friend up, and escape, after probably setting off every alarm from Romulus to the neutral zone. The computer broke into his reverie just as the proximity indicator began blinking like crazy.
A Romulan vessel has been identified by long-range sensors. If there is any other information you require, do not hesitate to ask, and enjoy your starship adventure on the USS Yorktown.
Scotty resolved not to jump to any conclusions. Unless a vessel was purposely looking for the Yorktown, he doubted she could have been detected. And even then, they'd have to pass pretty close to pick her up. Otherwise, the cloak would conceal her. Tying his monitors into the long-range sensors, he took a look at what he was up against. Sure enough, there was a ship out there, Judging by the power curve, it was pretty damned large. Probably a warbird. Using the Yorktown's computer and sensor logs, Scotty extrapolated the vessel's course and heading. It appeared to be a standard patrol pattern. What's more, the Romulans were moving quickly. He doubted that the Yorktown would be in close sensor range for more than a few seconds. He was just starting to breathe easier when he saw the warbird slow down and come to a stop, and then come about until it was on an intercept course with the Yorktown. Only then did Scotty concede that his luck had finally run out. Standing up, he faced the main view screen. He would meet his end on his feet, he vowed. Computer, drop cloak. Full power to shields and weapon systems.
Shields and weapons at full power. Thank you for your request, and enjoy your starship adventure aboard the USS Yorktown.
The warbird showed up a few seconds later. Scotty was amazed at the magnitude of it. The thing was several times the size of the Galaxy-class Enterprise, and Picard's ship was more than double the size of the Yorktown. Clearly, he had no chance. Surprisingly, the Romulans hailed him. When he answered, an angry-looking individual in a commander's uniform appeared on the view screen.
Federation starship, you are in violation of Romulan space and the Treaty of Algeron. Lower your shields and prepare to be boarded, or I will blow you out of space.
Scotty had no choice but to comply. But first, he purged all information about Spock from both the Yorktown and his shuttle. Only then did he lower the Yorktown's shields and feel the Romulan tractor beam latch onto her. Picard leaned back in his captain's chair and considered the bridge's main view screen, which reflected the long-range sensor grid. There were several red blips moving across the thin green lines of the grid. Each blip represented a Romulan warbird. Riker turned to him.
There should be more of them, shouldn't there?
Picard nodded and turned to Data, who was stationed at Ops.
Mr. Data, I want to know why these neutral zone patrols look so sparse. Put together whatever information you can access and come up with a reasonable hypothesis.
Hearing the opening of the turbolift doors and sensing his officers' reactions, Picard didn't have to look back to know that McCoy had entered the bridge. The Admiral ascended to a spot alongside Riker and harumphed.
So, Picard, what are we doing to help Spock?
The captain did not normally tolerate that tone on his bridge, not even from a higher-ranking officer.
As it happens, Admiral, I have already begun working toward Ambassador Spock's release.
He turned to Worf.
Any response from the Romulans yet, Lieutenant?
The Klingon shook his head. McCoy scowled.
Well, I'll just wait here till we get one.
Picard exchanged a glance with his first officer. Rising, Riker indicated his seat.
All yours, Admiral.
As McCoy sat down, he gave the captain the impression that he was willing to wait for a very long time. This time, when Aragian went over the day's briefs, he looked for news from Constanthus. Surprisingly, there wasn't any. The proconsul was about to shut off the screen when the last item caught his eye. Apparently, a Federation starship had crossed the neutral zone, with a Romulan cloaking device aboard. Strange, he thought. And even stranger, the vessel was at least 100 years old, as was the cloaking device. It had no crew, only a single addled and middle-aged human, and neither he nor the ship had at any point posed a threat to Romulan security. The commander of the warbird that had captured the human was preparing to interrogate him, after which he would dispose of the ship and most likely the human as well. Aragian stroked his chin. He hadn't risen to the rank of proconsul without finally tuning his instincts. And right now, those instincts were telling him this human was important. Hitting a pad on his desk, he activated the intercom system.
Send a subspace message to Commander Grandjock of the Claw. Tell him I wish his captive to be taken to Outpost 48. Also, alert Commander Hayjack to prepare the Vengeance. I am traveling to the Outer Worlds today, more specifically, Outpost 48. Alert the administrator there to my plans. Also,
Tell him the prisoner is not to be harmed.
As you wish, Your Eminence. Sitting back in his chair, Aragian entertained the prospect of visiting a bleak, primitive outpost, which could hardly have been farther from the splendor of Romulus. He hoped the human was worth it. Picard was growing weary of McCoy's company. Painfully weary. At the moment, the man was standing among the aft stations, harassing the officers posted there. Out of desperation, Picard turned to Worf and asked the same question he'd asked half a dozen times already.
Any response from the Romulans yet, Mr. Worf?
None, sir. Perhaps if I were...
He stopped in mid-sentence and looked at one of his monitors. Smiling grimly, he turned to the captain again.
I have received a response, sir. The Romulans have granted us a secure link to their governmental center. The respondent is a proconsul named Aragian.
A moment later, the view screen filled with the image of a lean and wolfish countenance.
I am Proconsul Aragian, and you must be Jean-Luc Picard.
The captain stood and approached the screen. It was time to lay his cards out on the table. At least those he was willing to show. Proconsul, the Federation is aware of the capture of several dozen Romulan unificationists on Constanthus. As a strictly humanitarian gesture, I have been empowered to take them off your hands. A smile played at the corners of the Romulan's mouth.
A humanitarian gesture. I fear you've lost me, Captain.
Picard smiled back. As the Federation sees it, your empire is in a no-win situation. If you keep the prisoners, they become symbols of oppression. If you kill them, they become martyrs. Even worse. But if you turn them over to me... Aragian's eyes narrowed.
I see your point now. If I release the prisoners, they will be seen as exiles. Examples of Federation weakness, who couldn't prosper in the Empire.
The captain nodded.
Precisely. Not that it will provide a long-term solution to the unificationist problem, but at least it will buy you some time.
The proconsul tilted his head.
Then you believe this unification movement will be an ongoing difficulty for us, even with this group gone?
First, thought Picard, the truth.
I do.
Now, the lie.
Nor is Vulcan any happier about it than you are.
Contrary to popular belief, most Vulcans believe their society will be corrupted by an influx of Romulan ideas. They want no part of it, hence the dispatch of the Enterprise.
In other words, Captain, this is an embarrassment to your side as well as mine.
That's correct, Proconsul, and my job is to eliminate it. Preferably before it gets out of hand. What I am offering is a graceful way out of this mess.
I will take it under advisement, Captain. We will speak again. Aragian out.
A moment later, the image on the view screen reverted to the grid they'd seen before, with its red blips moving slowly from one quadrant to the next. Picard frowned. It wasn't easy to tell what kind of effect he'd had, though he was reasonably confident he'd made some headway. Suddenly, he heard an exclamation from the vicinity of the aft stations. Turning, he saw Admiral McCoy making his way around the curve of the tactical station.
Damn it, Picard! Are you out of your mind?
Again, the captain thought, on my bridge, in front of my officers.
If you have something to say to me, Admiral, I suggest we discuss it in my ready room.
Before McCoy could suggest otherwise, he turned to Riker and gave him the bridge. Then he led the way into the familiar confines of his ready room, took a seat behind his desk, and waited patiently for the Admiral to join him. He didn't look directly at McCoy until the older man had shuffled in and the door had closed behind him.
Now, Admiral,
what is it you wish to tell me? McCoy cursed lavishly beneath his breath.
My God, man, you've dealt with the Romulans before, haven't you? How can you trust those bastards?
Picard leaned forward. What exactly are you suggesting? That I carry out this negotiation without speaking to the Romulans? McCoy's face reddened.
What I am suggesting is that you do what you set out to do.
Rescue Ambassador Spock.
The captain leveled a hard stare at him.
In other words, you'd like me to take on an entire enemy fleet, not to mention whatever defenses they enjoy on Constanthus, without any regard for diplomacy. In other words, you're damned right. Picard here.
This is Commander Data, sir. I have obtained some information concerning Romulan ship movements, which may shed light on the inadequacy of their numbers at the neutral zone. In tracking their engines' ion emissions, I noticed that a large number of their vessels have been deployed to a particular sector of the Empire.
And why that sector in particular, Mr. Data?
I do not know, sir. However, I will continue to seek the answer. Data out.
In the silence that followed, McCoy glared accusingly at Picard.
Ship movements and this patty cake you're playing with the Romulans. I expected more from you, Captain.
Without waiting for a reply, the Admiral headed for the door. Picard bit his lip as he watched McCoy walk out onto the bridge. It was difficult enough dealing with the Romulans. Dealing with the Admiral as well made it doubly difficult. Scotty turned at the sound of footfalls. Standing, he looked out across the energy barrier separating his cell from the ship's corridor outside it. A moment later, he found himself face to face with 3 Romulan officers. The one in the middle was the commander he had seen on the Yorktown's view screen. Of course, that had been hours ago before the Romulans beamed him onto their ship and brought him to their brig. Obviously, they didn't know how to treat a guest. A Starfleet captain would never have kept him waiting so long. The commander took a step forward until his face was half a meter from the engineers.
I will have my explanation now, human.
Scott returned the commander's unblinking stare, and his scowl as well.
I have nothing to say. If I were you, I would reconsider. You are alone, on a ship that is a century out of date, and yet you dare to enter Romulan territory. Tell me why.
Scotty tried to size the commander up to divine his intentions. Why hadn't he destroyed the Yorktown on the spot? Was it simply to be sure the human wasn't a threat before disposing of him? He repeated his earlier remark.
I have nothing to say. You must be mad, even for a human.
Suddenly, Scotty had an idea. If nothing else, it might buy him some time. After all, as long as he lived, Spock still had a chance.
You'll ne'er win, Romulan. Nay, as long as I draw breath.
The commander's brow furrowed.
Win what? We are not at war. Your people and mine, at least not until you made your pathetic incursion into our space.
Leaning toward the commander suddenly, Scotty was gratified to see him flinch, despite the barrier between them.
Do not think you can pull the wool over my eyes, you treacherous Romulan pig. You think the Federation will be yours for the taking, but even if the fools at Starfleet cannot see what you're up to, I can. And I'll nae rest until I destroy every last one of you.
Obviously repelled by the display, the Romulan withdrew a few paces to confer with his officers. Finally, he came to a conclusion.
Interrogate him. Find out if he has some hidden purpose, or if he really is as crazy as he appears.
Though he maintained his manic expression, Scotty blanched inside at the prospect. He knew he wouldn't last long at the hands of a Romulan interrogator. And then something incredible happened. The voice of a Romulan officer came from the room's intercom system.
Commander, we have new orders regarding the prisoner. He is not to be harmed, sir.
What?
Sir, the orders come from Proconsul Erasian himself. We are to bring the prisoner and his vessel to a station in this sector. Erasian is en route and will deal with the matter personally.
The commander grunted. Turning to Scotty, he managed a resentful sort of smile.
So there is something more to your story, human. Whatever it is, I can assure you the proconsul will find it out.
Without another word, he departed, his officers falling into line behind him. As Scotty watched them go, he wondered what a Romulan proconsul could possibly want with him. Unfortunately, he had a feeling he'd soon find out. The first time Worf noticed the energy pulses on his long-range sensor monitor, he thought they were caused by a natural phenomenon. However, after a while, he began to wonder if he hadn't discovered something else entirely. That's when he put the ship's computer on the case. The pulses didn't seem to be generated by anything natural, the computer advised him. More than likely, they represented some sort of message. But what was it? Who had sent it? And for what purpose? Again, he set the task before the ship's computer. As it began its translation protocol, the Klingon tapped his communications badge. A moment later, he received an acknowledgement in the form of Picard's voice.
Yes, Lieutenant. What is it?
Worf told him about the pulses, and by the time he was done, the computer had finished its work. The answer to his questions stood in small red letters on the otherwise dark monitor screen. It wasn't good news. Not at all.
Lieutenant, are you still there?
The Klingon frowned.
I am, sir. Unfortunately, our rescue mission just became a good deal more complicated.
Picard leaned forward in his chair at the head of the observation lounge table. His senior officers looked back at him. Admiral McCoy was there as well, of course at the far end. The captain glanced from one face to the next.
It seems we now have more than one hostage situation to address. Montgomery Scott has been lost in Romulan space. That's the message Mr. Worf received just a little while ago from Captain Scott himself, apparently via a series of energy pulses.
McCoy's brow furrowed as he absorbed the news. After all, he had served with Scott on the original Enterprise.
How the devil did Scotty get into Romulan territory?
Picard shook his head.
I wondered that myself. As a result, I did some checking with Starfleet Command, which came up with some rather interesting information for me.
The captain went on to describe the liberation of the Yorktown. By the time he finished, there were more than a few expressions of admiration around the table. Riker's eyes narrowed.
This isn't just a coincidence. He must have gotten wind of Spock's captivity and set out to rescue the ambassador on his own.
The Admiral harumphed.
At least someone showed they had the guts to get Spock back.
Picard darted a glance in McCoy's direction. He would not take the bait, he told himself. He would not. Gathering himself, he made what he knew would not be a popular announcement.
Unfortunately, our orders are largely the same as before. We are to monitor Ambassador Spock's situation and negotiate for his release. Captain Scott's problem must be regarded as secondary.
The Admiral's eyes blazed.
Secondary of all that...
Picard interrupted him.
We are here to address a threat to the Federation, Admiral. We cannot allow our personal feelings to cloud our objective.
McCoy grunted.
Then why bring Scotty up at all?
The captain fixed him with a gaze.
Because he may be tortured. And if he is, he may talk. Thus far, the Romulans don't know what they've got on Constanthus. But soon, they may.
The Admiral pounded his fist on the table.
All the more reason to go in and get the both of them out. No, Admiral. That is not the approach with the greatest chance of success. Nor will I risk the Enterprise on such a venture.
Riker nodded.
I agree with the captain. We can't place the whole ship in jeopardy.
He turned to Picard.
But, sir, what about a shuttle? On a clandestine mission? I know it won't be an easy matter to retrieve Captain Scott from wherever they're holding him, but then I like a challenge.
Before the captain knew it, Geordi had volunteered as well, and Data too. And then Troy and Crusher and Worf in quick succession, even though Scott and the Klingon had not been the best of friends. Picard held up his hand for silence. Apparently, Scott had made quite an impression during his short stay on the Enterprise.
I'm certain Captain Scott would be gratified to see how highly you think of him. However, risking even a shuttlecraft...
Worf cut him short.
It would not be much of a risk at all, sir. Captain Scott is being held in a lightly fortified sector of the Empire. Nothing at all like Constanthus, and according to his message, his prison is a rather dilapidated one.
The captain sighed. He weighed the chances of success against the rewards of failure, and finally, he made his decision.
Against my better judgment, I will allow a rescue attempt. Commander, you will be accompanied by Commanders LaForge and Data. As for the rest of you, I need you more here on the Enterprise. Mr. Worf, you will take over Mr. Data's examination of Romulan ship movements. Dismissed?
The Klingon looked as if he were about to protest, but thought better of it. Instead, he frowned and headed for the exit. So did everyone else. Everyone except the captain and Admiral McCoy, that is. Once they were alone, facing each other across the length of the table, McCoy leaned back in his chair. His blue eyes gleamed beneath feathery white brows.
You know, this ups the ante, Picard. If the Romulans realize the Federation sent a team to get Scotty out, it's going to make them less eager to negotiate about anything, including the release of the Unificationists.
McCoy jabbed a bony finger at the younger man.
You're going to have to find a way to speed things up if you're going to get Spock out of there. Play another angle, maybe. In fact, I've got something in mind.
As Picard listened, McCoy shared his plan with him. There was only one problem with it.
It won't work, Admiral. We're dealing with a delicate problem here, one with sweeping implications for the Federation. This is no time to conduct an experiment in gamesmanship.
McCoy stood and planted his hands on the table.
Damn it, man. Don't you see? Extreme situations call for extreme measures. That's the way we always did it on our Enterprise.
As the captain rose, he felt the blood rushing to his face.
It might help, Admiral, if you remembered that this is not your Enterprise. We do things differently around here, and as long as I am in command of this vessel, we will continue to do them differently.
McCoy's eyes screwed up tight.
Then you leave me no choice, Picard. From now on, you're no longer in command of the Enterprise.
The captain blinked, scarcely able to believe his ears.
You heard me, Picard. I'm relieving you of your command. You're restricted to quarters. Admiral, listen to me. Think of the officers we're sending out in that shuttle. Think of the lives you're playing fast and loose with. I am thinking of lives. I'm a doctor, damn it. I've never thought of anything else.
With that, he turned and exited the observation lounge, leaving the captain all alone. Behind his back, Picard could hear the Admiral address Mr. Worf.
Over the channel for me, Lieutenant. To Constanthus.
The Klingon hesitated. The captain knew that Worf would not simply obey McCoy's directives, not without some explanation. After all, personal loyalty meant more to the Klingon than anything. Sighing, Picard came out onto the bridge. All eyes were drawn to him, Worf's in particular.
You have received an order, Lieutenant. I trust you will follow it.
Satisfied, McCoy turned back to Worf.
Well, Mr. Worf?
As the Klingon complied, albeit reluctantly, the captain crossed in back of him and made his way to the turbolift. Nor when its door opened did he look back. He simply stepped inside, let the doors whisper closed again. For the first time in years, someone else was in charge of the Enterprise. McCoy tapped his communicator badge.
Admiral McCoy to Shuttle Bay 1. Is Commander Riker still there?
Commander Riker is gone, sir. He and Commander Data and Commander LaForge have left in the Justman. Is there anything I can help you with, sir?
I guess not, Lieutenant. I just wanted to let them know that Captain Picard's no longer in charge here, but then they'll find that out soon enough. McCoy out.
Sitting down in the captain's chair, McCoy could feel Counselor Troy's scrutiny and her confusion. He turned to her.
You're surprised, Counselor. Don't be. Captain Picard and I had a little disagreement, that's all. I'll be running things till we've pried Spock loose from that den of vipers.
Tapping his communicator again, McCoy looked up at the intercom grid hidden in the ceiling.
This is Admiral McCoy. Until further notice, I'll be replacing Captain Picard as commander of this vessel. I expect you to respond to my orders as you'd respond to his. That'll be all.
Troy looked at him.
Admiral, I know you are within your rights to assume command. However, it has been a long time since you've had occasion to deal with alien races. Stop right there, Counselor. I'm all too familiar with the Romulans. And they've got my friend. I'll be drawn and quartered before I let...
Worf cut him off before he could finish.
Admiral McCoy, I have obtained a communications link with Constanthus. You will be speaking with Governor Tharas.
A moment later, the governor's image filled the view screen. As far as McCoy could tell, Tharas was a typical Romulan administrator, beady-eyed, wary, and not half as smart as he thought he was.
Greetings. My name's McCoy, Leonard McCoy.
I am Tharas, Governor of Constanthus. And the reason for your communication?
The Admiral shrugged.
I wanted to see if we can't work something out with regard to those unificationists you're sitting on.
Is it not customary to conduct negotiations with the homeworlds?
Actually, we tried that. A fellow named Arasian said he'd think about it. You know what that means, don't you? I'm no spring chicken, Governor. I don't have time for a runaround. Now, the way I see it, you're the one who captured the rebels. It makes sense to me that you'd be the one to decide their fates.
The Admiral leaned forward in a conspiratorial kind of way.
Governor, I'm presenting you with an opportunity, a chance for you to improve your position in the Empire without making martyrs out of those rebels.
Thoris seemed interested. Inwardly, McCoy congratulated himself. He had the Romulan right where he wanted him. The Admiral described the offer Picard had tendered Arasian. However, in this version of the transaction, Thoris would get credit for extracting the Empire from its pickle, and Arasian, by contrast, would be made to look like a fool. The idea seemed to please the Governor.
So, have we got a deal?
I will consider it and return your communication when I have an answer for you.
The Governor's image vanished from the view screen, replaced by the star field that had preceded it. Turning in his seat, the Admiral noticed that Counselor Troy was looking at him again. If anything, she seemed more concerned than before.
Don't have a canary, Counselor. When it comes to Romulans, the direct approach is the best approach. Trust me on this.
But far from giving him her trust, Troy got up and left the command center. McCoy could feel the tension the counselor had left in her wake, the chill. He ignored it. After all, as Picard himself had pointed out, people's lives depended on what they did here, and McCoy wasn't going to let anyone deter him from doing what he had to do. At the helm of the Justman, Riker scanned his monitors as he approached the Romulan outpost at 3/4 impulse speed. Their strategy was a simple one. They would pass by the outpost, locate Captain Scott, and beam him up. If all went well, they'd be heading for the neutral zone before Scott's captors had any notion he was gone. Data, who was sitting beside Riker, spoke up. "Sensors show an orbiting vessel that could be the Yorktown. This would seem to confirm our conclusion that Captain Scott..." Stopping in mid-sentence, the android frowned, ever so slightly. "Commander, there is also a Romulan warbird in orbit." Riker heard a curse from the rear of the shuttle where Geordi was manning the Justman's transporter unit. Data turned to the first officer. "I do not believe they have spotted us yet, Commander. They must be operating on passive sensors only. Still, I estimate they will detect us in no more than 4.5 minutes. Riker thought for a moment. "Data, can you tell me where the warbird's positioned with regard to the outpost?" The android a second or two to assimilate the information on his monitors. "The warbird appears to be on the opposite side of the planetoid from the ground installation. From our angle of approach, it is located just over the northern horizon." The first officer nodded. "Good. Then with a small adjustment, we can place the planetoid between us and the warbird and still have line of sight access to the installation. If we're careful, we may be able to use the planetoid itself for cover and get close to the outpost without the warbirds knowing about it." Geordi sighed. "But getting in is only half the problem, Commander. Even if we can do that and sneak Scott out, they're eventually going to realize he's gone, and when they do, they'll have a warbird to sick on us." Riker looked at him. "In that case, we'll have to find another way to elude it, or hope that one presents itself." He made the course adjustment. It took them out of their way and delayed their arrival at the planetoid. But it was necessary if they were going to keep the warbird in the dark. By the time they'd crept within transporter range, the first officer could see the planetoid through the observation port. It was a dead gray rock, devoid of even an atmosphere, featureless, except for the Romulan installation that clung to it like some kind of artificial octopus. Riker pointed to the spot on his monitor. "There it is. Fortunately, a place that old isn't likely to have the sensor capacity to detect us at this range. Scan it for human life signs data." The android complied. Unfortunately, it seemed they'd hit another snag. "There appears to be some sort of magnetic shield around the central portion of the installation, Commander. No doubt, a measure designed to prevent just the sort of rescue we had in mind." Geordi chimed in from the rear of the shuttle. "We can use the remote control bands to beam down and penetrate the shield on foot. Since the outer limits of the place are unshielded,
All I need to do is find a blind spot in their sensor net.
Riker nodded.
Get to it, Geordi. And don't spare the horses.
Riker looked around at his new surroundings. A moment ago, he'd been standing on the shuttle, waiting for Geordi to complete the transporter protocols. Now he was in a narrow, poorly lit corridor, somewhere in an outer arm of the sprawling Romulan installation, just outside the magnetic shield. Data and Geordi were right beside him. Like the first officer, they were armed with phasers and tricorders, and each of them wore a remote transporter control band. Together they scanned for approaching Romulans. There weren't any within 100 meters. Riker considered the stretch of corridor that led toward the center of the installation, where they would undoubtedly find Captain Scott. It wouldn't have made any sense to erect a shield around part of the outpost and then hold him somewhere else. Silently, he took the lead. They passed through the shield without incident. Then for several long, tense minutes, they continued along one corridor after the next, deftly approaching the center of the place by the most obscure route possible. When their tricorders picked up a couple of guards cutting across their path, they retreated to the closest intersection and concealed themselves until the Romulans had gone by. Then they resumed their journey. A short time later, they entered what looked like a detention area, though the cells they could see were quite empty. The first officer checked his tricorder for human life signs. Strangely, he couldn't find any. He shook his head. How could that be? Looking up, he saw that Geordi and Data were just as puzzled as he was. Where in blazes was Captain Scott? Suddenly, the android's head snapped about. He gestured to indicate something up ahead of them. Most likely, the first officer thought, another couple of guards passing by. Then Data's head snapped around again, this time in the opposite direction, and again in a third direction. By then, Riker knew there was something going on. He brushed past the others and stuck his head out into the corridor. The next thing he knew, there was a blinding flash of sapphire energy, a flash that might have caught him square between the eyes if Data hadn't hauled him back. Geordi shook his head.
We're surrounded, aren't we?
Data nodded.
Yes, we are. All avenues of egress are blocked.
The engineer turned to Riker.
Your call, Commander.
The first officer tightened his grasp on his phaser. If the Romulans were onto them, there wasn't much chance of their getting away. On the other hand, he didn't love the idea of being taken prisoner.
Follow me, gentlemen. This is called making a break for it.
Diving out into the corridor, Riker rolled and came up firing. He didn't have to look behind him to know that Data and Geordi were right behind him, giving the Romulans all they could handle. Then he heard the sound of footfalls behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw that another pack of Romulans had caught up with him. Cursing, he turned to fire back at them. But this time he wasn't so lucky. A disruptor beam caught him in the shoulder and spun him around. A second one swept his leg out from under him. The last thing he recalled was twisting awkwardly in the air and wondering how much it would hurt when he landed. Proconsul Aragian stood with his hands clasped behind his back and surveyed the bridge of the Federation starship. The registry on the exterior of the hull suggested this was the Yorktown, the starship employed more than a century ago. But it had a Romulan cloaking device, one of the original modules developed on the homeworld long before cloaking technology was perfected. Of course, the device had since been upgraded, and by someone who knew what he was doing. But its rudimentary construction was still eminently recognizable. How had the Federation gotten its hands on it? None of the records he could find gave him any answer, but then even a proconsul couldn't access quite everything in the Imperial databanks. And there was a bigger question. Why had this vessel crossed the Federation neutral zone? Commander Grandjock had called its pilot a madman, and yet a madman with the talent to run a starship on his own. Aragian approached the red-orange railing that encircled the command center and ran his fingertips along its surface. A middle-aged human on an antiquated vessel, a mission that defied all logic. The proconsul sighed. There was something missing here, some bit of information he lacked, but what could it be?
Proconsul.
Aragian turned and saw one of his aides approaching, data pad in hand. The man's name was Tirak.
Your Eminence, there is an energy leak in the vessel's warp engine.
Aragian looked at him.
An energy leak? Is it dangerous? No, Proconsul. What's more, it does not appear to be accidental.
Aragian regarded Tirak.
Not accidental? Are you saying the humans sabotaged this ship? Not sabotaged, Your Eminence, simply created a condition which would direct a pulse out into space. I believe it may be an attempt to communicate with the Federation. Certainly that theory would be supported by the direction in which the energy is leaking, though it would require a more thorough examination to determine if there is a code involved.
The proconsul didn't need to conduct an investigation. He could feel the truth of the matter in his bones. More than likely, Tirak was right. The energy leak was a means of sending a message to the Federation, a call for help, perhaps. He clapped Tirak on the shoulder.
You've done well, Tirak. Now do something more. See to it that the humans' activities are curtailed until I transport to the surface, which will be in a matter of minutes. Of course, Your Eminence.
As Tirak made contact with the ground installation, the proconsul seethed. Clearly, this madman wasn't mad at all. It was one thing to commandeer an ancient starship and try to take it behind Romulan lines, but to devise such a clever way of calling for assistance.
Proconsul!
Aragian turned, surprised at the alarm in Tirak's voice. The man looked ill.
What is it, Tirak? The human, Your Eminence. He's gone.
His anger mounting even higher, Aragian whipped out his own communicator and made contact with the base. He would soon straighten this out.
Commander Barnock!
A moment later, base commander responded, his voice tremulous.
I don't know what to say, Your Eminence. The human was under the watch of...
Tirak interrupted the conversation.
Your Eminence, sensors show that one of our transport vessels has broken orbit without authorization and is leaving at maximum speed.
Aragian couldn't believe it. He terminated the communication and initiated another one, this time with the commander of the Vengeance.
This is the proconsul. Bring me aboard, now!
In seconds, he found himself on the Warbird's bridge. He turned to Commander Hayjack.
There's a transport vessel that's just broken orbit, Hayjack. I want it pursued.
Hayjack barked some orders. Immediately, the bridge crew set to work. By the time the proconsul took up a position in front of the view screen, it had obtained an image of the departing transport. The Vengeance was a good deal faster, Aragian assured himself. The human would not get away, despite everything.
I want the pilot of that vessel taken alive, Hayjack. He owes me an explanation and a great deal more.
Hayjack turned to his weapons officer.
Target the transport's warp drive. Warp drive targeted, Commander. Photon torpedoes ready.
Hayjack's eyes narrowed. He gave the order to fire. As Aragian watched the view screen, he saw the transport racked by a barrage of photon torpedoes. All of them focused on the portion of the vessel where the warp drive was most vulnerable. He smiled as the transport dropped out of warp. Then, before his startled eyes, the transport blew up. The shards of its hull went careening in all directions, including right at the view screen. The proconsul realized that his mouth was hanging open. He shut it, then cast a glance over his shoulder at Hayjack.
I said I wanted him alive, Hayjack.
Hayjack shook his head, disbelievingly.
I don't understand, Your Eminence. Those torpedoes shouldn't have caused an explosion. They should have disabled the warp drive, nothing more.
Aragian turned back to the view screen, where the fragments of the transport were still tumbling through space. Perhaps the commander was correct. Perhaps the human had seen that he would be caught and interrogated and escaped the only way he could, by destroying himself. But this wasn't over yet, Aragian resolved. Clearly, they knew what the human looked like, and he'd shown up in a Starfleet uniform. That meant there was a good chance of their matching him with a Starfleet personnel file.
Open a secure channel to the home world, Hayjack.
As the commander moved to comply, Aragian promised himself he would get to the bottom of this, one way or another. Spock surveyed his followers' faces. At the start of their captivity, they had been willing to learn, in some cases, even eager. But as the day of their trial came closer, their tempers had flared. There had been disagreements, bitter words. Some arguments had nearly come to blows. He'd had to concede, finally, that these were Romulans, not Vulcans. No amount of education would change that, even if they were to live many years instead of the single day left to them. Yet they were here now, looking to him for a palliative that would relieve them of the pain they were in. And as their teacher, he would do his best to ease their passage. Above all, the universe is ordered by logic, in both the realm of normal space that we inhabit and the other dimensions we have observed. Even in the chaos of subspace mechanics, we can see the elegant symmetry of the universe. For the moment, his students seemed to forget their plight, caught up in the hopefulness of his lesson. Encouraged, he went on. Surak tells us to find order in chaos. When asked about the possibility of life after death, he said it would be illogical for the universe to create complex, reasoning beings only to dispose of their minds when their bodies no longer functioned. That principle was the basis of the Vulcan practice of preserving the Katra, the sentient soul of the dying, in the Hall of Thought. Unfortunately, none of his students would have their minds saved that way, but he didn't dwell on that fact. We will live on, in one manner or another. When the tyranny of the Empire is but a distant memory, what we do here and now will be remembered. For a moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, his students raised their hands in the Vulcan salute. It was the equivalent of applause, and it swept through their ranks as a wind sweeps through the desert. Scrasus was the last to respond, but in the end, he raised his hand as well. The Vulcan felt a rush of pride, a natural response which it would have been illogical to deny. He had reached all of those before him, even the difficult Scrasus. It was a satisfying moment, and it was made more precious because he would enjoy so few of them before the Romulan sentence was carried out. Nodding almost imperceptibly to his students, Spock raised his hand to return the salute. Aragian regarded the 3 Starfleet officers crumpled on the floor of the corridor, surrounded by Commander Barnock and a dozen of his guards. One of the intruders was clearly human. The other 2, he wasn't so sure about. After all, one had a mechanism that halfway encircled his head, some device which the proconsul had never seen before, and the third seemed too pallid to be a human. Aragian stroked his chin. And they were trying to free the other prisoner, you say? The one who took his own life just a little while ago? Barnock was eager to be of service. Yes, Your Eminence. We can think of no other reason for their being here. Bring them all to the nearest cell, Commander. I want to interrogate them at my leisure. And Barnock, don't let these slip away as the last one did. I will double the watch, Proconsul. Barnock gestured to his waiting subordinates. Immediately, his men bent to the task of lifting and transporting the prisoners. Aragian considered what their presence here meant. Both the original prisoner and his mission were important to Starfleet, or they wouldn't have sent a team here in an attempt to retrieve him. Now, Aragian was more eager than ever to identify the mysterious individual who had destroyed himself trying to escape from the outpost, and to determine why the man had crossed the neutral zone in the first place. Of course, with his new group of prisoners in hand, he was that much closer to finding out. Alone in his quarters, Picard stared at his personal terminal and reran the log of McCoy's conversation with Governor Tharis. It was all he could do to restrain himself. Somewhere across the imaginary border of the neutral zone, 3 of his people were risking their lives to rescue one of the greatest figures in the history of the Federation. If their mission had been fraught with danger before, it was now doubly so. He'd thought about asking Dr. Crusher to judge McCoy incompetent to run the ship. That was her prerogative as chief medical officer. But she wouldn't do it unless the Admiral really was incompetent. And as much as the captain disagreed with McCoy's practices, he couldn't say for certain that the man was unfit.
Come.
The door slid aside, revealing his Klingon tactical officer. Worf peered at the captain.
Sir, I have accumulated additional data on Romulan ship deployments.
The gleam in the Klingon's eyes told Picard there was something interesting about the information Worf had gathered. However, the captain reflected he was no longer in command. The Klingon seemed to see that in his expression.
I told the Admiral I had this information, sir. However, he did not seem very interested. I was advised to file it.
Picard gestured to a chair.
In that case, Lieutenant, have a seat.
The Klingon moved to a chair on the other side of the room.
Apparently, sir, the sector of space to which the Romulan ships have been sent is bounded by the border opposite the neutral zone. They share this border with a race called the Stug, which cut off relations with the Federation recently for no apparent reason. The Stug are a formidable people, according to all records of our dealings with them. However, they have never succeeded in unifying themselves sufficiently to pose a threat, either to the Federation or anyone else.
Picard frowned.
So, why would the Romulans have committed so many of their vessels to Stug space?
It was clear from the Klingon's expression that he didn't know. Picard sighed.
Continue to keep an eye on the situation, Mr. Worf. Perhaps the Romulans, or even the Stug, will do something that will illuminate their motives for us.
The tactical officer inclined his head.
Aye, sir.
Without further ado, he rose and made his exit. The captain watched the door slide closed behind Worf. Like the Klingon, he wished he knew more about what was going on out there. But as long as the Enterprise was someone else's to command, he could only watch and wait.